Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the April 23, 2018 Committee of the Whole meeting of the DeKalb City Council. Prior to roll call this evening, for anyone who would like to speak to any member or any items on our agenda, you're more than welcome to fill out a speaker request form. And we'll call you at the appropriate time. We again would like to have the roll call, and I'm going to ask Deputy City Clerk Ruth Scott to do the honors. Thank you.
Jacobson?
Here.
Finucane?
Here.
Marquardt?
Here.
Fagan?
Here.
Noriko?
Here.
Verbic?
Here.
Favor? Smith?
Here.
7 present.
There are no speaker request forms that I've received for folks who would like to speak to any item that is not on the agenda. However, we do have one individual, Cassandra. Cassandra, where are you? Yeah. If you'd like to, Gene, I think what I'm going to do is have public participation since we only have the one item. You can speak, and then we'll have Gene speak, unless you'd like to respond to whatever Chief Lowry does.
I can go first.
Go ahead. Identify yourself, please.
Cassandra Camp from the Student Association. Good evening. My name is Cassandra Camp, and I am the Legislative Director of the Student Association. On behalf of the students of NIU, I thank you for your efforts to create a safer community. I would like to make it a point that the Student Association is not against initiatives that improve the safety of the community and our students. However, we do have a few concerns moving forward as you pass Phase 3 and 4, both phases that will directly affect the students. First, we would like the City of DeKalb to consider partnering with NIU for parking permits. Students pay at least $92 for their annual parking permits to park on campus, and an additional $25 on top of the cost of parking in apartment complexes leaves students with a tight situation and an empty pocket. By partnering with NIU to make both parking permits passes interchangeable, you will not only cut the cost of living in the DeKalb area, but also make the students feel part of the DeKalb community by accommodating to our requests. The students requesting for an interchangeable parking pass would follow the same procedure as other members of the DeKalb community requesting a parking pass. They would have to demonstrate a current driver's license, registration and insurance, and proof of residency on one of the affected streets. Second, the Student Association requests for a grace period following the passing of Phase 3 and 4 as the semester begins in the fall of 2018. A grace period of at least 1 month following the beginning of the academic calendar allows the students to become accustomed to the new parking policies across DeKalb. This grace period will consist of warnings, but the police would not document within the system until the grace period ends. And finally, the miscommunication between the students and the City of DeKalb has become concerning. For a while, it was unclear which NIU representative of the City of DeKalb and the DeKalb Police Department talked to about the Safe Streets Initiative. We are very grateful that the city has reached out to Melanie Magara and the Student Association, but we feel like there could be a better process of communication. Northern Illinois University is not one homogeneous entity. Although the Student Association represents all students and tries to relay as much information as possible, we cannot move all major efforts alone. The DeKalb Police Department would have more efficient communication with the students by reaching out to multiple groups on campus, including the Student Association. One option would be reaching out to the Greek councils and attending chapter meetings to discuss the initiative. Another option would be providing information to the resource centers on campus, which touch a large proportion of students on campus that might not be represented in other groups. The Student Association and the students of NIU appreciate all the hard work the City of DeKalb and our community's diligent law enforcement are performing, and we hope you consider our recommendations for the following phases. Thank you.
Thank you, Cassandra, and we appreciate the efforts of the Student Association at NIU. Thank you very much. I don't believe anybody else is registered to speak to this item, so I'm going to call on our police chief, Gene Lowry, to address the one consideration that we have tonight, and that is our Safe Streets Initiative, Phases 3 and 4. Gene?
Thank you, Mayor, Council, staff, and community and student associations and students representing here tonight on behalf of NIU. What I'd like to do tonight is give you a brief review, promise to be brief, and further respond to any questions you may have or any other questions that may arise from the audience that are here today, from the audience members here. So let's begin. Phase 1 and 2 updates. Basically, where do we sit with Phase 1? Phase 1's been implemented. Phase 1 has gone fairly well without any thunderous pushback or incidents involving its actual implementation. Like Cassandra said, we did implement a grace period when we implemented Phase 1, and we intend to implement a grace period with any of the phases that are implemented. We've already noticed anecdotally some positive changes in the neighborhood in regard to some of the behavior we begin to witness as the season warms up. So we're looking optimistically to see what the results are over a period of time. And we'll keep the council and the community posted on those results. Phase 2 update. Phase 2, as you know, was passed by this council at the last meeting. The situation that exists with that is we've got a slight delay doing some ordering in regard to some of the actual stock that goes into creating the signage and things. As each phase goes through, I know that Public Works is trying to get the orders arranged, and there are many things that are in the queue. We expect that to be implemented in a few weeks once that stock has been received by the city and once it's been put together. We'll follow the same practices as before. We'll get the signage up. The signage will be appropriately flagged with streamers and to provide attention getting for the signage. We'll make a host of postings, not only in social media, but with press releases to the community about it, both in the print media and radio media. We'll also coordinate our efforts with NIU to ensure that our liaison with NIU is up to speed on everything, and that what we've come to depend on is that voice within NIU helps us get the word out to all the students. It's just a matter of fact that it's extremely difficult for an outside agency to come in and respectively contact the significant amount of diverse organizations on campus that are student organizations. So we've really relied on student leadership and NIU administration and staff to help get the word out for us, and we'll continue to do that. Once we have the implementation phase ready for Phase 2, we'll be moving along again in the same fashion as we did before with Phase 1. 2-week grace period, and warning period, posting of notices, and the like. Items moving forward for phases 3 and 4. We have a variety of them, but I think these are positives, and many of these have come about as a result of input from many in the community, but primarily focusing on some of the student concerns. We're working diligently with our information technology department in regard to online permitting. Our goal is to have an online permitting process as part of the visitor temporary parking in certain areas of phases 3 and 4 and other phases as well to accommodate people and accommodate their needs. This is also in conjunction with the already well-established, going on years, if not decades of past practice of what we term alibi parking within the city. It has been come to this council's attention on a variety of occasions that there's some concerns about permitting and the costs of permitting. We've done a preliminary breakdown of that throughout the course of this process. We're waiting for what our actual costs are in regard to online permitting. But for Phase 3, when we bring it to council, we'll be bringing a breakdown of what costs are. But the costs go well beyond what it costs to purchase a permit, what it costs to have a staff member break down, a fraction of what that hour is to process it. The other costs are going to go to things like signage, what it costs for us to get an online permitting system put together, and all the other costs. Our preliminary indications indicate that with the cost of permits as they are, it would take us almost 10 years to recover the cost of getting the program up and running with hard costs in other areas. Signage in particular being the most significant cost, and a cost that wasn't anticipated by Public Works because it wasn't within their realm to say, hey, this is going to happen for sure, until it was passed by council. And I might have to have some interpreter here so I can read this a little more effectively. NIU collaboration and parking options. As late as today, I've been in contact with NIU officials who have been very collaborative and very informative in regard to this matter. There are already options in place. The big one is that every parking lot affiliated with NIU after hours is free parking, period. So that does create a lot of options within this mix, especially for areas like the nursing school and like the parking lot on what I call the North Grant parking lot, just north of the new residence halls. That evolution will also contain things like bus service that NIU provides. The Husky Safe Line. I spoke with Chief Phillips today. He indicated that they are also looking at creating additional stops, and he wanted to assure everyone, especially the students, though, that those stops are stops, but it's not written in stone. If they see a bus and it's out there and they want to ride, their drivers are instructed to pull over to the side. If they get flagged down, pick them up. So there's some other consideration in the works. I'm not going to take that away from Chief Phillips. More to follow. I think some other things that are coming out of this, items moving forward, are things that come under code, the Unified Development Ordinance, and the actual permitting itself. But the one concern that we're seeing, in especially code and subletting, is we're already starting to see, as a matter of fact, it cropped up in phase 1, when a party came to us asking for 6 on-street parking permits, and it was later determined that the building that they were in was a residential building for once a single family was overoccupied and had been sublet out to an extreme. This was something that was very predictable, not with this specific case, but with what we knew going into this process, that subletting in and of itself in all areas of this program of Safe Streets, the parking component, subletting is an issue. And it's an issue that I think we can deal with. The next category is safe route, septet, lighting, cameras, and police. So when we talk about concerns regarding DUI, concerns in regard to walking, involving students, we really look at what safe routes is intended to be. And I think there's been an understanding of it, but maybe not to the extent that we need to. We're going to keep emphasizing that throughout the process. But 3-pronged Safe Streets initiatives. Proactive policing measures already underway. Parking regulations currently underway. Phases 1 and 2 approved. Moving forward, we'll be bringing 3 and 4, with 3 coming in May. We look at what the city has already done. Public Works has already done some tree trimming in regard to this matter. Along our proposed safe routes, for example, Russell, the mayor and Commonwealth Edison have coordinated a huge LED lighting project in this neighborhood that will probably light that neighborhood up as if it was daytime all year round. We might think we're in Alaska for 6 months out of the year. And we're continuing to investigate a methodology, funding, and the like outside the box with what we could do to get a public safety camera system, especially up along those areas and other key areas in this area, on both sides of phases 3 and 4, where we have our most problems, or have the most problems. And again, the last component of that is the police component, a greater police presence when we can. As we move on, one of the key things we've been doing to put some data in front of you in regard to phase 3 and 4 is we've been doing some parking surveys. The parking surveys include this. They include actual police officers going out at night, doing visual surveys of lots, and reporting back on information or things they see. But the other thing is, something we did that was a little bit different, was we this morning deployed a drone into those neighborhoods and took some photographs, which we're going to show you in just a little bit. Phase 3, quick reminder, phase 3 is west of Annie Glidden Road. It's a 2 a.m. to 6 a.m. parking ban, tow zone. Available parking meets the Unified Development Ordinance requirements with visitor parking available in private lots. Now, I say that with a degree of asterisk associated with that comment. And what I mean by that is this. We're going to investigate what we have through our GIS department with actual on-street parking and compare that to what's in the UDO with specific apartment buildings to ensure that there is available adequate parking. Again, you can see the numbers in regard to crime. They speak for themselves. Calls for service in Phase 3 in 2017, 3,421, 94 property, 72 drug, 8 weapon offenses, and 21 violent crimes. That's Phase 3. Phase 4, east of Annie Glidden, commonly referred to as Greek Row. Again, a no parking 2 a.m. to 6 a.m., established resident permitted parking in that area. We know that most of that area, but not all of it, most of that area is not in compliance with the current UDO. So we're going to have to make some parking accommodations. The public safety numbers are up there. Calls for service, 4,459, 159 property, 135 drugs, 17 weapons offenses, and 22 violent crimes. Again, the data's been presented multiple times to you, but those are the next 2 phases we're bringing to you, Phase 3 in May, hopefully. Let's talk about these parking surveys. I know this is hard to see, but I really would like the audience to try and focus on this. These were taken beginning around 5:30 this morning. It was taken with a drone. In the series of parking lots, we're just going to identify by generalities. They kind of go from the darkest to the lightest. You know, the light changes fairly quickly then. But this shows a sample on a day of what parking looks like. You can see a parking lot with ample parking available off-street. Again, Phase 3, west side of Annie Glidden. This is the Regent neighborhood, starting to get a little bit lighter. If you look at the parking, a little bit hard to see, ample parking available, and you can barely see a little bit of what's catching up on the street that kind of goes off to the right of the screen. It makes a 90-degree turn. You're seeing actually per capita space more parking on the street than you are in the parking lots. So what we're seeing is, and I can only give you anecdotal data at this time, in calls for service in this area, we're going back through our computer-aided dispatch system to try and collect data regarding calls involving situations that involved subletting complaints. What we're finding in this area is a larger amount of people being involved in incidents demanding police service that are disputes about where they can park because they have sublet offline of their lease. This is a Varsity neighborhood. So when you look at this morning, a huge amount of vacant parking available within the private lots over there. Again, another sampling from Varsity. Again, still some parking spots available in this lot. I mean, this one says it all. This is the Echo Park neighborhood this morning. This is probably occurring right around 6 a.m. Now remember, this is one day, one point in time. The drone capabilities are a little bit limited as far as what it can pick up at night, but we will try to deploy it during other times to bring some data back to you. Again, the Regent neighborhood, ample parking. Again, this is west of Annie Glidden in Phase 3. Fotis Echo Park neighborhood. This is Aspen, way out on the west end, just north of Hillcrest, right where Hillcrest comes to an end. More than ample parking available. Varsity neighborhood again. This is Pappas. You can see some familiar sites of certain buildings that are in that area. Hate to be redundant, but ample parking in that lot. Another shot of the Pappas neighborhood from a different perspective. So as I finish this up, I'm not saying someone's not telling us the truth. That's not it at all. Somewhere between where we sit as we move these ordinances forward and the reality of what parking is available and how private property owners are processing their parking is something to be addressed. But at least the data from what we've seen on the street, some of the complaints we've handled, and now what we've seen with our on-site driving lots at night and putting up the drone, this is what we're seeing. There is ample space available. So from the community input perspective, it's been hugely beneficial throughout this process. We've actually changed course on a variety of occasions from the very beginning on where we went with this. I want the council to know, I think you'll be surprised at what the costs are in regard to permitting, but when you look at the cost of permitting over 10 years when we would hit the break-even point, that's about the same time when new signage would have to go up. My understanding is that Public Works and the signage crew really tries to work on a 3-year cycle throughout the city on the replacement of certain signs. And of course, as signage goes, sometimes it gets claimed as a trophy and sometimes it gets damaged for a variety of reasons. But nonetheless, those have to be replaced and taken care of. So from a money-making perspective, it's a non-existent proposition. I want to continue this dialogue with the university and every stakeholder in the community. The neighborhoods have been great. And as you reflect back on the phases, 1 and 2, how the maps changed once we had community input, even some of the actions of the council as we've had community input regarding Lauren Drive in that neighborhood, we've course corrected. And I don't think at this stage of the game, any of it's really hurt us. If we continue to see the positive components that we're seeing or the positive reporting early on in phase 1, I think we'll see the same in other phases. I am concerned about phase 2 implementation from the perspective of community expectation. And what I mean by that is this. I believe the community has an expectation we're going to be getting that ramped up fairly quickly. I think it's going to take several weeks to get that squared away for the reasons I've already stated. So I want it to be clear to the community it's not forgotten. But there are some neighborhoods in phase 2 that are begging for it to be implemented right away, and my heart aches for them. The continuation of cooperation and collaboration are an ongoing process between us and NIU. We continue to monitor our landing page. We continue to address and course correct as needed. I don't have anything else in addition to say to you tonight. I would encourage any questions you have, or if there is any further dialogue from the community. I think this is a valuable time. I'd also like to announce that, I believe it's this Thursday, Alderman Finucane, we have a ward meeting we're hosting at the police department for the affected wards in this situation. So please, I'm asking the community, if you have a concern or you want to come out, we'll be there to kick that off. I believe our start time was 7 for that.
Double checking right now. 7.
7? So we've also gotten the word out with NIU and through social media and the like. So I know it's early in the cow for me to stop, but I'm sure you're real happy that I'm stopping to talk. Stop talking. Having said that, I would answer any question the council has or any comments from the community.
Yeah, before we turn it over to the council for questions or comments, Bill, what is the meeting on Thursday, and is that a ward meeting?
It is wards 1 and 2. We're going to talk about the Safe Streets Initiative.
Oh, good.
Particular to our ward. So Jean's kind enough to host us there.
Great, wonderful. Okay. Cassandra?
Am I allowed to ask questions?
Sure. Come on up. Time's on our side tonight, so.
So I have a couple questions specifically for the DeKalb Police Department specifically. So Chief Lowry stated how he was saying how the NIU parking lots have they have free spots during night, but I'm a bit confused on why they think that the NIU parking lots at night have anything to do with the residential lots, because as we said, it would be giving those parking permits to these residents who are living in these areas. Just like any other residents, they're just NIU students who are also paying for parking passes. So when we're asking for making both passes interchangeable, it's not because we can't park in the NIU parking lots at night. It's the fact that, well, we would have to park in the parking lot and then somehow walk 25 minutes to our house if we wanted that pass. If, let's say, our parking lots are full at our apartment buildings, or we live on a house and we unfortunately cannot fit all of our cars into that building. So that's where we're coming from with the interchangeable parking pass. And we are confused about why the police department thinks that those lots at NIU on campus would have anything to do with the residents. And then my second question, it would be, what's the estimated wait time that they would do to give these students and these residents a grace period going into the academic calendar? Because we know that there has been a grace period implemented for both, but it's essentially and especially important when the students are coming in for the academic year who have been so used to just parking on the streets, and with all the hype that happens coming into college and starting new and fresh, it's going to be a lot to get accustomed to that, especially something that's never been implemented before. So my two questions were, why do the NIU parking lots have anything to do with the residents' lots? And then the second thing is, what is the estimated grace period?
Okay.
Thank you.
Gene, you care to address that?
I may have to have Cassandra remind me of what she just asked me. But let me address the NIU parking lots and from my perspective, so you understand from my view. I'm not saying the NIU parking option should supplant the obligations of the landlords and property managers on the west side of Annie Glidden. They have an obligation to provide parking in accordance with the UDO. And as such, if there are too many cars in that parking lot, there's a couple of things that may point out to us. One, there's too much subletting and they're allowing too many people to live in apartments in opposition to the ordinance and in violation of the UDO. Two, no one who lives west of Annie Glidden should have to walk to an apartment. The UDO provides 1 parking space per bedroom and 0.5 parking spaces per unit. As such, if I had a hypothetical 10-unit or 10-apartment single-bedroom unit complex, I'd have to have 15 parking spaces available for that group. So I would say, in first part, if I'm answering you correctly, number one is, I don't believe the NIU lots are options to provide residents who live on the west side additional parking. They should have that already available to them through their landlord and as subject to their lease. All of the landlords that I'm aware of have a permitting process for their lots. That should be known up front when anybody goes in to sign a lease. And I think that is the essence of where we start to see some conflicts in roommate relationships, whatever that dynamic or situation is at that given time, is that when we increase the amount of subletting that's off lease, we're not only in violation of the regulations regarding that from a UDO perspective and ordinance occupancy perspective, but we're also, from the landlord's perspective, in violation of that lease. So that should never happen, from my understanding. You may be able to tell me and educate me on how that could happen, and that would be helpful for us to understand, because that's a communication piece between us and the landlords. That's really important why those surveys we're doing with the drones start to put some texture to this. Did that help? What was the second question?
And then the second question was, what's the estimated grace period for returning from the outlet?
So throughout this process, we've talked about a grace period of 2 weeks as we implement it. I didn't anticipate doing another grace period. I think that's a policy decision, and I would like to get some feedback from the council in regard to that as well. If we felt that was something that was important, I think it would be valuable to do. But here's the problem we face when students come back. in the fall. The level of activity, the level of crime, and in particular the level of violence, not by students, but by others that tend to migrate to the community during that time, puts us in a position where that's when we need enforcement the most. We're hoping that we constantly improve our methodology in regard to communication between us, the students, and NIU. So we have people geared up already. We've already had the discussion about orienting students not only at the beginning of this process as they return to school with the help of NIU, but also orienting them to, from my perspective, telling them who the bad property owners are rent-wise, rental property-wise, who are not standing up and doing the right thing by their properties, who have had a multitude of issues with the city. And letting them know up front, so they, as they enter into leases, they start to make choices and say, okay, well, if this certain property has X amount of complaints by the city, or with the city against a specific landlord, maybe this is a place where I shouldn't be renting. And I know there are so many variables in this, but I money is a variable. Transportation is a variable. There's so many variables here. But if we at least get the information out, it helps in the decision-making process of the choices that are made early on by the students. And I hope, both of my kids graduated from NIU. I would hope that they would have had the information on the front end so they could have made a decision on where to live instead of being trapped in a rental property that was poorly managed, poorly maintained, and unsafe.
Yeah, from a student and and city compatibility issue, I think that's just one of the things that we need to do. We need to communicate. We need to keep those lines of communication open. Cassandra, thank you very much. I appreciate your comments. I'd like to open it up now to council discussion. Alderman Jacobson.
Cassandra had one more question, Mayor, if that would be okay.
Could I just make one last rebuttal about it? I just wanted to end on about the wait period. I'm sure all of you have had multiple jobs in your lifetime, and let's say one time you had to wake up at 7 a.m. and you had to get to work at 8, or another time you had to wake up at 8 and get there at 9. But let's say you had to start waking up at 5 a.m. So you know that you have to wake up at 5 a.m., but it's going to take you a while to get accustomed to it and live a new lifestyle. It would be the same way for these students. We've been living this exact way. We've been parking on the streets, and it's been very natural to us. But it's also going to take some time for us to get accustomed to these new policies. Like I said, we're not against the policies, but we would like to be able to see that the DeKalb community would work with us on giving us a grace period to get accustomed to these new policies so that we can work with you to make the campus and the community a safer place. Thank you.
And you'd like those sort of to align to the end of the semester and the beginning of the semester, from what I understand.
Yeah,
right?
so just for when phase 3 and 4 are passed, we would like a month going into the fall 2018 semester to get accustomed to this new these new policies. And we're not asking for like an entire semester. We're just asking for some time for students to get used to this, for us to continue to get the word out, because we will have new students next year, and we'll have transfer students, and we will continue to have new people who are moving into that area that might not be familiar with that. And so it's really important to continue from what we have now going into the fall, just to have that period to where we can get used to it.
Okay. Thank you for your comments.
Thank you.
Alderman Jacobson.
Chief and I have gone back and forth on some of these issues. Again, looking at these two specific areas, the reality we're seeing is that the 7th Ward properties west of Annie Glidden have plenty of parking, and that it's very likely that the reason they're not parking in the lots is because they don't want to pay a fee to do so, and we are offering free parking. Knowing that we have plenty of parking by UDO there, and knowing that, again, there should be visitor parking, those might be conversations we may need to stimulate with the landlords to make sure that those spots are available especially, again, my worry is that residents that don't want to pay will park in those spots, claiming they're guests when they're actually residents. That's something, obviously, informationally, we have to figure out that hurdle to, and I think Chief is working on that. The reality of the major parking program in the Greek Row neighborhood, the biggest and really most effective group of the changes we're making are the fraternity and sorority houses. They are the ones that are significantly under UDO in terms of the parkability of those properties. Again, you're talking some of these properties have 35, 40, 50 members living in them with 15 to 20 parking spots for them. So I realize that's going to create somewhat of a crunch in that neighborhood. And I think that's, again, what we're looking at. To understand what's in place now, Greenbrier already has resident-only parking. We've already instituted that. We did that 2 years ago. We're already charging a fee. And there was no pushback by the students. There were some questions, and those questions I know were directed back to the PD to understand exactly where they can get those passes and how they can get those passes. But to claim $25 a year or 15 cents a day is going to break the back of a college student. If they can't afford 15 cents a day, they can't afford the gas or the insurance to put in the car. So I reject some of that discussion. I've had the discussion, again, owning buildings and managing buildings on Greek Row with my tenants, two of which have some of those parking problems and are parking out on Greenbrier. And they understand that there's going to be a change coming, and we've had that discussion, and they're trying to figure out how that's going to affect them. But looking out into the neighborhood where there are parking problems, again, being that Greenbrier already has instituted this several years ago, you're talking now Blackhawk and Kimberly and a little bit on Hillcrest are really the only buildings that aren't currently under this schematic now. And having that discussion, again, the houses on Blackhawk have access to a private lot next to Fanatico that one of the property owners rents very cheaply by the semester or by the year for people to use the lot. And it is basically, there's never any cars in that lot. Occasionally there's one. To understand that really the only crunch is going to be on Hillcrest and Greenbrier, again, those are things we can focus our efforts on to try to fix where that crunch may have to be moved to. When the chief is talking about NIU lots being open, those are for your guests coming into town. And I took offense to the last meeting we discussed this, when the former Speaker of the Senate made clear that she doesn't think it's appropriate to expect college kids not to drive drunk. That's offensive. That's ridiculous. The reality is we do expect our college kids to not drive drunk and to plan ahead and to organize transportation. 5 or 6 years ago, when we didn't have Uber service in this town and we didn't have cab service, I could see where it would be much more difficult and much more affecting those students. The reality is we do at this point. We have those abilities. We have a bus service. We have the Safe Line service. To hear and understand from my undergrads that I'm on daily contract with, why don't you use those services? Well, we don't want to be inconvenienced and wait a few minutes. We want to go now. And again, I understand that to a point. That's why I have a car. That's why I like to get around. I live in that neighborhood. I live on Edgebrook, and my lot has plenty of parking for the residents that live there. The times when it hasn't over the years are because they are over-occupying units. So when we're talking about single-family houses, or we're talking, hey, we live in a house and there's not enough parking, again, if there are under the designated 4 people living in those houses, there should be, in most cases, 2 garage spots and 2 driveway units. If there's not, or if there's more than that living in those units, that's something we have to address. I am certainly willing and able, especially at our meeting Thursday night. I hope the student association is there. I hope some of the councils step up, some of the individual groups step up and participate in those meetings. Again, I think we need to have a conversation specifically focused on Hillcrest, Greenbrier, and Blackhawk about where those cars and their guests are going to park. And there are some opportunities. We do have 912 Edgebrook. We do have the private lot across the street from Blackhawk. there may be some additional availability on Greenbrier for us to explore. Those are the residents that are really going to be affected, at least in my mind, as the program rolls out. As a secondary comment and a side comment, again, the reality was we didn't want to implement this during the school year for the specific fact that you don't want to mid-year create turmoil and create confusion. I think you said it best by the answer, lots of new students will be coming into that neighborhood next year. The transfer students, the exchange students, the new Greeks that are moving in. To start them with an amnesty effectively, again, it goes against accountability. When they're coming in, when they're new to the block, to understand the parking regulations for a month and then have them change mid-year, I think is rather confusing and is probably goes against what the goal would be to do. Especially understanding that, again, the groups being affected are fraternities and sororities, and they are not able to host events the first 2 weeks of the year. So there shouldn't be guests and visitors in those fraternity houses without violating NIU policy. And again, the student speaker made a comment last week, we can't expect our groups to follow our own internal policies. We can't assume or hope that they would end events by 1 o'clock in the morning, which would, again, not be affected by these parking changes. We can't expect that they're going to follow the rules NIU set out. I reject those claims. I say that as an advisor, as a property owner, as someone who's been involved in that neighborhood for 15 years, that's what we endeavor to do every day, is to have them accountable and meet those expectations that are both being promulgated by the university and the city. And that's what it's our job to do. So, again, I find it somewhat offensive that the argument is saying, well, we just don't want to follow rules. We are willing to hear you. We are willing to listen to you. And again, that's not something you said tonight. It was something the speaker said in our last meeting here. Going forward, again, we have a meeting Thursday at 7 o'clock on Thursday night at the police station. We want you to be there. We want to start answering these questions. We want to start looking at how we can make it work for those that are really going to be affected. To pretend that all property owners or all residents are going to be affected, in reality, I think it is overblown. But there are going to be several. And I think it's important that we look at their individual situations, understand how many members or how many guests, residents are in that house, and where we can find, as a city, opportunities for them to park that are safe, that are well lit, that are convenient to these buildings, and will reduce the impact significantly so that it's not a problem going forward.
This is a process too, believe me. Okay, let's continue the conversation with the city council. Alderman Noriko.
I understand that, this really is a give and take process. And what I would be supportive of is a very brief amnesty period, kind of recognizing what Alderman Jacobson said, but also what, the students are putting forward. Rather than 4 weeks, 2 weeks, say. Give them a period to ensure that, the word has gotten out and word of mouth has circulated, and I still think that does a lot. But at some point, you have to pull the bandage. And, at some point, there will be people inconvenienced. But again, what's the greater good? But to try to address, concerns, if we take a look at a brief period.
Alderman Fagan.
Chief, you've met with DARA on this issue.
Yes, sir.
Are they prepared to be proactive when they rent out to students, to let them know what the consequences are on parking and what they have to comply with the city of DeKalb?
I have every indication. I did meet with the DeKalb Area Rental Association, for those who don't know what the acronym is, DARA, in regard to this whole situation, safe streets and everything that we're going through now. They pledged that they would help support the communication effort. In phases 3, we did some hand leafleting to get the word out. But we're also depending on crime-free housing to help us get the word out to specifically to property owners and managers to facilitate the process of getting that word out and getting their cooperation. I even spoke to them about my concerns regarding overpricing of parking permits for the residents. There seems to be some disparity. There's some similarity, but there is also some disparity. And I felt that if the membership of DARA, which represents really some of the best landlords in this
Yes.
community, would get to some commonality, not only for the benefit of the students in regard to pricing of private lot parking for the apartment they live in, that it would also assuage some of the concerns we have because it would get them in the lots. But yes, they have pledged to work with us.
Great, thank you.
And I think we have one other gentleman who wants to speak. Would you please come to the podium, please? Tristan, right?
Yes. Greetings, everyone. My name is Tristan Martin, and I currently serve as the current Vice Chairman and Director-elect of the Mass Transit within the Student Association. And I want to touch on the grace period that we were talking about specifically. So, first off, I don't believe that a 2-week grace period is going to be enough for students. Now, I understand the concern that Alderman Jacobson brought up about students not, new students coming in and having to adjust, with the 1 month and then have to adjust again after that. However, I do believe that the majority of NIU speaks on the behalf that they would enjoy a grace period, because I know that a couple of, obviously there are going to be a lot of incoming freshmen, incoming transfer students, incoming foreign exchange students, and I want to make sure to represent them as well. But the majority of NIU that has been here longer, I believe, would speak to that more, that they would enjoy having a little bit more of a grace period so that these people that have been with us can be retained by us in future years. Also, if the council decides to not do this, why not let students be able to, within that month period, hopefully have a month period, within that month period, use their student IDs to maybe waive the tickets. That way you're able to have a filter system, so students would be able to have the 1 month grace period if they were to get a ticket. And they would be able to give their student IDs to the police department so that these tickets aren't held against them. And you're also while simultaneously being able to shut off any non-NIU students that park in these areas affected by parts 3 and 4 of this initiative. Because by that, most of the crimes, from what I understand, have been by non-NIU students. Being able to do this would, like I said before, create a filter system. And the other thing, and I wanted to address you, Alderman Jacob, about the offense. I apologize on behalf of Speaker Wang for the offense that you received on that. I don't believe that her intention was to say that students should be driving drunk. I believe I speak for all students and everyone here in the DeKalb community when I say that everyone here strives to fight against drunk driving. I do believe that's an issue, and I think that we should work further with the city of DeKalb to take care of that issue. And I hope that through this Safe Street initiative, we're able to do that. Thank you, guys. I yield.
Thank you, Tristan. Any further comment from the council or yes, Alderman Verbeek?
Thank you very much for speaking up about a compromise to starting up. My concern, though, based on our data, is that there's a good reason for implementing this and not allowing a grace period. Chief, could you comment to that?
I think there's some really good reasons why. I think this all boils down to the permitting process. So, not that Tristan said anything wrong, or not that it's not worth considering, certainly is. The problem with that kind of a process is for the officers on the street, the operational issues it creates. So if we're dealing with a situation with a car that's on a street that we believe is part of some situation, we may not just cite it, we may be removing it if it's in a tow zone. So then there's going to be an expense incurred. And from an operational perspective, if we just limited it to a money consideration for the respective student involved in that situation, nobody's going to get towed, and I don't think it would be the city's responsibility to cover that tow cost during a grace period in that type of situation where you're trying to differentiate between students and non-students. It would be very confusing. I think what we should do is look at what options have been presented tonight, allow us to talk it over within the department, and come back to the council when we make our presentation on phase 3 to address some of our concerns. My biggest operational concern is once we implement and get an initial grace period underway and done, we would then be actively enforcing. And then all of a sudden, when the students return, we would stop actively enforcing and institute another grace period and start that whole process all over again. I think it's extremely difficult for the officers on the street to adjust. And the workload they have when students return to NIU, not because students are bad, they're good, but with all of the level of activity and demands for service we have, some of which are definite threats to public safety, we need to be operational at that time. I also believe that if we do a righteous job in getting the word out, and I believe NIU's committed to that as well, on the front end, that I think that we conquer that. But I don't want to close the book until we've given it some proper deliberation.
Yeah, and in closing our meeting this evening, I'd like to make a couple comments, if I may, myself. One is, for those of you who may be following some of what's on the screen, I would urge you to go to our city website and punch up the PDF that is part and parcel of the background information for the Safe Streets Initiative. This has not only some excellent verbiage as to what is involved in 1, 2, 3, and 4 of the Safe Streets Initiative, but there's also a map there, and I think it's an excellent way to educate oneself to that. Secondly is this. This is a process. This meeting tonight is purely informational. I think we've gotten 1 and 2 in terms of the phases of the Safe Streets Initiative off to a pretty good start. We need to work on 3. We need to work on 4. I commend Alderman Jacobson and Alderman Fanouken for having their ward meeting this Thursday night. We would hope that folks who do have an interest in the Safe Streets Initiative, especially in 3 and 4 phases, come to that. And let me back up. Safe Streets Initiative started with what? An address to make our community safer. And I think that is one of the goals that we have set forth, that we want to be a safe city, a safer city. And so while we realize that as we roll out these initiatives, nothing's perfect, not everybody agrees. We have, I think, taken a step backward on a couple of neighborhoods. I look at the Lawrence Street, University Drive area. Hey, we listened to those folks. What they said made sense. Hey, we did that. So I welcome comments, and I welcome comments even though they may not agree with what we have set forward. Because as I said from the very beginning, this is a process. Okay? Very good. Thank you, Gene. Appreciate it. We are not recessing tonight. We do not have an executive session of the City Council. I'd ask for a motion to adjourn the Committee of the Whole meeting.
So moved. Second.
It's been moved and seconded. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
So moved. We are adjourned. City Council begins at 6 o'clock. Thank you.